The scene opens in total darkness, a void where only words exist. The phrase, "Ship of Theseus," appears, drifting in the silence. It is a philosophical riddle that begins to unfold. Long ago, the people of Athens carefully preserved the ship of the hero Theseus. Whenever a wooden plank grew old and rotted, they would remove it, fitting a new, sturdier piece in its place. Over a great expanse of time, this process continued until eventually, every single part of the original ship had been replaced. The question remains, can that vessel still be called the ship of Theseus? Kettle stands in the forest, his hand resting thoughtfully on his chin. He ponders this analogy as he looks toward the horizon. He realizes that the current Lutean kingdom is nothing more than a giant ship of Theseus. Its people, its soldiers, and its very foundation are being replaced piece by something else, something perfected by the laws of the demonic realm, yet no longer what they once were. In the clearing, the atmosphere is heavy with the presence of the chief mage, Adamant Lagesh. He takes several slow, deliberate steps forward, his staff thudding against the dirt. He tells Eileen once more that it is time to return. He asserts that the only place she belongs is within the borders of the Lutean kingdom. He speaks with an absolute authority that leaves little room for argument. Eileen stands frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She clutches the fabric of her cloak near her heart, her eyes wide with a deep, internal conflict. She looks at the mage and then at her own hands. With a voice trembling with despair, she asks what meaning there is in returning now. She confesses her belief that she is nothing more than a monster mimicking the form of the real Eileen. She sees herself as a hollow shell, an imitation born of the forest's resets. Kettle watches her, his expression unreadable. He turns his gaze back to Adamant Lagesh. The mage stares at the barbarian, his eyes cold and focused. Adamant tells Kettle to move aside. He claims that since they are now essentially of the same kind, being sustained by the distortion, there is no reason for Kettle to interfere. He believes Kettle should recognize their shared nature and step away. Kettle remains unmoved. He looks at the mage and asks, with a hint of genuine indifference, what that is supposed to mean. He states clearly that it doesn't matter to him what they are. Whether they are human, monster, or something in between is irrelevant. He tells the mage that he is only blocking his path to protect his employer. Eileen looks up at Kettle, stunned by his words. Tears begin to well in her eyes as she listens to him speak. Kettle looks back at her, his voice softening slightly but remaining grounded. He tells her that he never knew the Eileen from before. He didn't know the princess who lived in the palace. The only Eileen he knows is the person who has been traveling by his side, enduring the hardships of the road and facing the undying nights. To Kettle, the version of her that exists right now is the only one that matters. He doesn't see a monster or an imitation, he sees the person he was hired to escort. He looks into her eyes and asks a simple, yet profound question, what is it that you want to do? He gives her the choice that the kingdom and the mage have tried to take away. He calls her name, Eileen, acknowledging her identity even as she struggles to find it herself. The clearing falls silent as Eileen stares at him, the weight of his acceptance beginning to break through her wall of self-loathing. Kettle looks down at Eileen, his expression remarkably calm despite the weight of his previous actions. A small, confident smile remains on his face as he waits for her answer. Eileen is still visibly shaken, tears streaming down her pale cheeks as she clutches her cloak. The trauma of the reset and the existential dread of her current existence hang heavy in the air. Kettle asks her once more what she truly wants to do, ignoring the presence of the powerful mage standing before them. Eileen hesitates, her eyes darting to the ground as she struggles with the realization that she is no longer the human princess she believed herself to be. Finally, she speaks, her voice barely a whisper at first. She states firmly that she does not want to go back. She looks up at Kettle with a mix of desperation and newfound resolve, declaring that she has no desire to return to a kingdom that sees her as nothing more than a perfected vessel or a tool. Kettle's smile widens into a grin. He seems satisfied with her choice, as it simplifies his current task. He turns his attention back to Adamant Lagesh, his posture shifting into one of casual defiance. He tells the chief mage that since his employer has made her decision, his role remains unchanged. He is here to protect her interests, regardless of what she has become. Adamant Lagesh is silent for a moment, his eyes narrowed behind his wide-brimmed hat. He breathes out a long, frustrated sigh, the white orb on his staff pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light. He mutters that things have ultimately come to this. The atmosphere in the clearing turns suffocatingly heavy as the mage begins to channel his mana. Kettle senses the shift in energy. He turns slightly and calls out to Patrick. He asks the disguised Lick to take care of Eileen for the moment. Patrick, maintaining his stoic mercenary persona, gives a short, firm nod. He moves toward the princess, his eyes never leaving the barbarian's back. As Patrick leads Eileen away, Kettle stands alone against the chief mage. Adamant looks at Kettle with a mix of anger and cold calculation. He remarks that Kettle seems to be enjoying the situation far too much for a mere barbarian. Kettle doesn't deny it. He admits that he finds the unfolding events quite enjoyable. He watches the mage closely, his silver eyes reflecting the glowing staff. He notes that Adamant clearly looks like a formidable magic user, and he is curious to see what kind of spells such a high-ranking official can produce. The mage begins his incantation, blue and white light swirling around his hands and staff. He tells Kettle that he will regret blocking his path. However, before the spell can be completed, Kettle vanishes from his original position. The sound of an explosion echoes through the forest. Kettle moves with a speed that defies human perception, closing the gap in a fraction of a second. He doesn't draw his weapon. Instead, he drives a massive, empowered fist directly into the mage's chest. The impact is catastrophic. Adamant's body is pulverized instantly, exploding into a spray of dark red and black particles. Kettle stands in the center of the carnage, his gloved hand covered in the remains of the mage. He smiles, offering a piece of tactical advice to the empty air. He states that the first and most effective way to deal with a mage is to kill them before they ever have the chance to cast a spell. But the silence is short-lived. The red and black particles do not settle on the grass. Instead, they begin to vibrate and swirl, drawn back together by an invisible force. Kettle watches, his eyes narrowing as he realizes his theory was correct. Within seconds, the particles coalesce and the form of Adamant Lagesh is fully restored, his robes and staff intact as if the punch had never landed. Adamant is gasping for breath, his eyes wide with a genuine, staggering shock. He stares at the barbarian, his mind reeling at the speed he just witnessed, a speed so great he couldn't even attempt a defensive reaction. He realizes he is facing something far more dangerous than a simple warrior. Kettle looks at the restored mage, his expression becoming more analytical. He wonders to himself if there is truly no limit to this regeneration. Before he can test the theory again, the ground beneath his feet begins to rumble. Adamant, now acting out of pure desperation and rage, slams his staff into the earth. Huge jagged pillars of rock and earth erupt from the ground, surging upward with immense force to crush Kettle. The forest is filled with the sound of shattering stone as the mage unleashes the full weight of his power to bury the barbarian under a mountain of debris. Kettle looks up as the massive jagged pillars of earth and stone close in on him. He seems almost impressed by the scale of the magic, noting to himself that such a feat is indeed possible. The collision is violent, a massive explosion of rock and dust that completely envelops the barbarian's position. The force of the impact shakes the very ground of the forest. Adamant Lagesh does not stop there. His eyes glow with a fierce, unnatural light as he clenches his fist. He channels a different school of magic, summoning thick, gnarled tree roots that surge out of the earth like giant serpents. These wooden appendages lash out at the sight of the stone impact, coiling and striking with enough power to splinter boulders. The mage then unleashes a devastating fire spell. Flames erupt in a massive pillar, consuming the area where Kettle stands. The intense heat turns the air into a shimmering haze, and the sound of the roaring fire drowns out all other noises. From a safe distance, Eileen watches the carnage with a look of pure terror. She cries out Kettle's name, her voice filled with desperation as she witnesses the overwhelming magical onslaught. Aaron stands beside her, his face grave, while Patrick remains silent, his golden eyes narrowed as he analyzes the battle. Patrick observes the sheer volume of magic being discharged. He notes that Adamant is spamming high-level spells that require an immense amount of mana. He begins to wonder if the mage's mana pool is also being restored to its original state, similar to how the knight's armor and Eileen's body were reset. He thinks to himself that if a mage with truly infinite mana were discovered, it would cause a massive wave of shock throughout the world. However, he senses that there is something else at play, something even more abnormal. Suddenly, a dark shape surges through the wall of flames. Kettle emerges from the inferno, his body and clothes remarkably unscathed. Adamant's eyes widen in disbelief as the barbarian closes the distance with a speed that defies logic. The mage realizes that Kettle is not just a strong warrior, but a monster whose capabilities exist entirely outside of standard measurement. Kettle doesn't give the mage a chance to retreat. He strikes again, his fist moving with such velocity that it leaves a trail in the air. He drives his hand through the mage's torso, the impact releasing another spray of blood and dark energy. Kettle smiles amidst the violence, admitting that a mage of this level is truly strong. He finds the challenge refreshing. Kettle looks at his gloved hand, now stained with the mage's blood. He watches as the red droplets begin to dissolve into glowing particles, drifting back toward the fallen wizard. Once again, Adamant Lagesh is restored, his body knitting itself back together in a matter of seconds. The mage stands up, trembling with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. He looks at Kettle and demands to know what the barbarian's true identity is. He cannot believe that a mere human could possess such terrifying power and speed. Kettle's expression remains calm and casual. He looks at the chief mage and gives a simple, almost mocking answer. He states that he is just an ordinary barbarian. Adamant's face contorts with rage at what he perceives as a trivial play on words. He refuses to accept that such a monster could be anything ordinary. The atmosphere in the forest shifts once more. Adamant Lagesh's desperate shock transforms into a cold, murderous focus. He tells Kettle that he will stop the preliminary probing and start dealing with him using his full power. He begins to levitate off the ground, his cloak billowing as a massive amount of mana begins to swirl around him, darkening the sky. Kettle watches the mage ascend, his silver eyes reflecting the gathering storm of magical energy. Instead of being intimidated, his grin only grows wider. He looks up at the floating wizard and admits that he is truly looking forward to what comes next. He stands ready, his axe at his side, as the battle reaches a new, more lethal level of intensity.